All right, good morning. It's so nice to see a few of you for our last little optional class session. I'm just going to double check that I am recording this, and I'm also going to post the PowerPoint that we look at if you need to come back to that later. Okay, if you can this morning put your camera on, that would be awesome. If not, I understand that you might have other stuff going on in the background there. So we're here to discuss what you need to do, what a successful Digital Public Library of America primary source analysis essay is going to look like. Just really quickly before we get started, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So I'm using the Equal Rights Amendment source set topic as an example here because it's not on your list. So when I talk about topic, your DPLA topic, your DPLA subject, I mean the whole thing, the Equal Rights Amendment. This is what the main page of your topic looks like. When I talk about sources, we're talking about the primary sources that you chose from the source set down here. So I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page before we get started any deeper into what your essay is going to look like. So our focus today is going to be on crafting a strong thesis. It's going to be on negotiating and annotating your sources. And we're going to talk about the organizational elements of the essay. What do you need to have in every part of your essay? And I'll pause periodically to ask if you have any questions. Like I said, this is being recorded if you need to come back to it later, and I'll post this PowerPoint. So let's start. We'll do a Q&A at the ends too, and I can show you some of those frequently asked questions at the Q&A. But I want to start here at creating a strong thesis. This tends to be what students are most worried about. And let me say right off the bat, you're worried about it, you're finding it challenging because it's challenging. If you're thinking like, my thesis, I'm really struggling with, what's wrong? Nothing is wrong. Creating a strong argument is difficult, and it continues to be difficult at every level. So when I wrote a PhD dissertation, I struggled to craft and recraft my thesis because it stays difficult. So don't feel like there's something wrong if you're finding the thesis challenging. We're going to start by talking about the thesis, and then we're actually going to come back to it later in this workshop as well. So let's talk broadly. What are the elements of a strong thesis? Your thesis is the roadmap to the rest of the essay. You put it at the end of your introductory paragraph. The last or second to last sentence is usually a good spot because it's guiding your reader. So sometimes academic writing can seem a little bit boring because it's not a mystery novel. Your reader should not get to the end of your paper, read your conclusion, and gasp, "Oh, that was your argument all along?" No, your reader needs to see your argument right up front because academic writing, scholarly writing, is an invitation for others to converse with you, to argue with you. Your reader needs to see what you're arguing so that they can evaluate your argument, evaluate whether or not your sources support your argument. So it has to be clear, has to be right up front in your intro. It needs to be, for a history primary source analysis, historically relevant. It needs to say something either about a change over time. Maybe you're exploring a moment of change where you talk about before, after this moment of change, or maybe it's a historically significant phenomena that during World War II, it's a historically significant phenomena that many women entered industrial jobs that they hadn't worked in before, right? So historically specific. It needs to be specific to your topic and to your sources. So using the example of the Equal Rights Amendment, it's not enough to say women in the 20th century fought for equal rights. Too broad, not specific to your topic and your sources. Women in the 1970s fought for equal rights by pushing for a constitutional amendment. Closer, but not specific to your sources, specific to your topic, ERA, but where are your sources? Women disagreed in the 1970s. Some of them supported the ERA, some of them did not. Now you're getting somewhere. Your sources are going to show pro-ERA, anti-ERA arguments. Let's get even one step more specific. Cartoons, both pro and against the Equal Rights Amendment, show that the arguments on both sides centered on images of women as either feminine or non-feminine. Okay, that was a little wordy. I need to recraft that. But now you're getting hyper specific. This is what cartoons about the ERA tell us. So just keep trying to get more and more specific to your sources. And last, but certainly not least, your thesis, your argument needs to be arguable. By that, I mean, another historian should be able to come along and in good faith, using historical support, argue against you. Someone should be able to come along and say, yes, but yes, women in World War II entered industrial jobs because of an advertising campaign. If that's your thesis, women in World War II entered industrial jobs because the government created an ad campaign encouraging them to. I could come along and say, yes, those posters were important, that ad campaign was important, but even more important was economic necessity. So do you see how someone else can argue that you missed something or that something else is more important? That's how history works. History is built on interpretations. Historians disagree on interpretations, and that's how history continues to grow and develop. Okay. Questions about historically relevant, specific, and arguable thesis. We're going to come back to this too. Your thesis is both the most challenging part of your essay, and once you've got it, it makes everything else easy, because the rest of your essay is supporting your thesis with your sources, supporting your thesis with historical primary sources. But I don't want you to wait until you have a perfect thesis to start writing, because time after time after time, I find that theses emerge in the conclusion. Time after time, I say, what a wonderful thesis you have in your conclusion. When you finish your first draft, you're going to find that you have written yourself into a more historical, more specific, more arguable thesis that shows up right in your conclusion. And you may copy and paste it. You may copy it and then retool it to be both in your introduction and restate it in your conclusion, and then rework the rest of your essay to make sure I keep supporting this thesis that I've discovered in my conclusion. So you want to start, if you don't have a perfect thesis, with a working thesis. Working thesis, there was a fight over the ERA. All right, start there. Next, you have to move into your sources. So we're going to go from our discussion about thesis. Now we're going to start talking about our sources. The job of your sources is to inform your thesis. You're not the other way around. You don't go digging for specific proof just for your thesis. So you start with a working thesis. Well, there's an argument over the ERA. Let me go into these sources and see what that argument looked like. What was the pro-ERA argument? What was the anti-ERA argument? Let me just start looking at my sources. The essay's focus is your analysis of these sources. So what I want to see on the page is a conversation between you and your sources, and a conversation between the sources. So let's start with step one, you and a single source in conversation. Annotate as you investigate. the best research, and this is much more broadly applicable, the best research advice I can give for you for writing any sort of paper is, as you interrogate your sources, start writing. This might be very brief specifics. I'm going to write down a little quote. I'm going to write down a little bit about their perspective. Or you may find yourself handwriting or typing, oh, I'm making an argument here. You may end up putting some of that directly into your essay. So write as you read. And I'm going to use read here for meaning listening, watching, looking at images, because you have a lot of different sources. So I'm using read as an umbrella term. Set a goal before reading. Your goal is, what do these sources show me about this movement and change that it affected? You may have a more specific prompt if you have like one of those oddball subjects, but you know if you do. As you approach your sources, or as you reread your sources, if you've already investigated them, write a quick prediction. What do I think is going to come out of this source? What do I expect to see? You might be surprised. Now, make decisions to read. Some elements you'll need to look at very carefully. Some skimming will take place. Some you need to go back and reread. You might need to look something up. Make those decisions. Don't just lock in and say, I need to understand everything about this source before I raise my head in 2 hours. Decide, this source really isn't working for me. That's fine. Draw on your prior knowledge. So the summary of your subject, the overview. Information from textbook, from classes. Maybe there wasn't a lot in your textbook about ACT UP, so you went and read up a little bit about ACT UP. Draw on that knowledge to understand your sources. Stuff that you don't understand as you go. And then pause and reevaluate. If the source is not what you thought it was, not if it's surprising you. So the source will surprise you. You thought you were going to be arguing one thing, the source is suggesting something different. That's good. Your thesis follows the sources. But if you're like, this source is not what I thought it was, I don't understand it, it's not working, I'm not sure what to do with it, go back to your DPLA set, pick another source. Use the DPLA search box. Find what is more relevant for you. That's perfectly fine. And as you read, don't take everything at face value. Sources have biases. Sources have their own perspective. Evaluate that. Evaluate its quality, evaluate its value. Who created it? When? Why? Do I need to read against the grain a little bit? Or should I take it at face value? This is where you start to also read your sources against and alongside each other. So first conversation is between you and the individual source. That's your first read. Then you're going to go back and reread, because now you're looking at how your sources interact. Again, right as you reread. Your goal now is, how do my sources interact with each other? Are you finding similarities, significant differences, common themes? Are you finding very different perspectives on the same theme? Imagine that the two sources have come to life and are literally talking to each other. Are they agreeing? Are they shouting? Are they disagreeing? What's happening? If you're like looking at the Black Panther Party and there's an FBI source, like, is one of them actually trying to shut the other one down? What's happening between them? Make note of that. What interactions are you seeing? And again, reevaluate. Are these sources just not talking about the same things, just not even talking to each other at all? That could be, oh, I see very different themes, that the Black Power movement isn't just the Black Panther Party. Your sources might be looking at the same subject in very different ways. So not directly talking to each other, and that's fine. That will inform your argument about them. It's also okay here to say, this one source is just not working with the others. I actually need to go back and find more on this perspective. I need to go back and find a different perspective because I've got too much on the one. All of that is fine. Those are the judgments that you will make depending on your focus and your interest. Now I want to move back to the thesis for just a moment here. This primary source analysis essay, it's not a research paper, it's just about the basic building block of historians, making a argument based on historical evidence. Why did I not just assign you to choose one source to analyze? Because what I'm asking you to do is to make an argument that the sources taken together show us something different. Then a single source couldn't tell us enough about the topic. To go back to that ERA example, a single source might suggest to us that women supported the ERA across the board. But when we look at multiple sources, we start to see, wait a second, some women fought against the ERA. Why? Let me find another source. They fought against the ERA because they didn't want to lose protective rights. Now I've got an argument. Single sources are valuable, but historians don't make arguments based on single sources. So think about, how does my thesis change when I look at the sources together? What interaction makes for a better thesis? I want to roll it back a little bit too. If you are lost as you read and write, if you are confounded, the most basic starting point for the sources is to describe them. What is the source saying? Who's saying it? If you're feeling lost, start with a description. Your rubric for the essay notes that for the best points, you'll go beyond description into deep analysis. But a description is a starting point. So if you're feeling lost, start by describing your sources. All right. Any questions? We're going to talk next about organizing the essay. But do you have specific questions about how to most effectively utilize your sources?
Want us to quote them directly?
I'm sorry, Nathan, can you re-say that?
Do you want us to like quote them directly?
That's a really good question. Thank you. You want to use brief quotes for sure. I'm gonna want to see a couple of brief quotes in your essay. For images, there might not be anything to quote, but I want to see a very specific references to elements of the images. But yes, I want to see direct quotes, and I want them to be very carefully selected to stay short, because this is a really short essay. And that's a trick. The fact that this essay is only 400 to 700 words, you're like, oh, easy peasy. The question I get the most is, can my essay be longer? Because I am asking you to do something extraordinarily difficult in a short space. So you have to be like with a scalpel on your sources, pulling out the most relevant quotes, pulling out the most powerful elements of the image, because you don't have room for big, long block quotes. In the paragraphs, I want to see, well, yeah, let's get into organization, because then we'll talk more about the paragraphs. But that was a really good question. Yeah, be very select about which elements you directly quote. And then remember also, when you're paraphrasing or directly referencing, you want to cite that as well, so that your reader understands, oh, you're referencing page 6 of a red record, or you're referencing this very specific image that I can go look at. Awesome. So let's move into, and if you have more questions, you can put them in chat if I don't see you. Let's move into organization. There are required elements of your essay that are very simple. Introductory paragraph, which includes your thesis, body paragraphs where your source analysis happens, and a conclusion paragraph where you restate your thesis, and then there's a free space we'll talk about what you can do with. Your organization is going to be informed by your argument. So how you present your sources might depend on your argument. That is, which order they go in your body paragraphs, which we'll talk about. And your entire organization is all geared towards supporting your thesis. So you're guiding your reader through your argument and through the support of your argument. So let's talk about each elements, the intro, body paragraphs, and conclusion. The intro should be relatively short. If you're in, let's say you're in Microsoft Word, double spacing, writing your essay, if it's more than a half a page, it's too long. You don't have room. The challenge of this essay is concise, brief, powerful writing. So you want to introduce your subject with a hook. This might include a very short quote from one of your sources, but you're not analyzing it yet. You're hooking your reader. Pull them in. Why should they care about your subject? Okay. Then very select relevant historical context. This should be 2 or 3 sentences. You cannot discuss the entire history of the women's rights movement. So you have to put the ERA in its most specific context, second wave feminism, the civil rights movement. Find out or think about what is the historical context my reader has to know to understand my subject, all right? Black Power movement, they have to understand the broader civil rights movement. American Indian movement, United Farm Workers, you have to talk about the civil rights movement, right? So think about specifically what is the relevant historical context. And then you end your thesis, usually in the last or second to last sentence. You end your introduction rather with the thesis, which spells out your argument. Remember, it's not a mystery novel, no gasping at the end. Tell your reader right here what your thesis is. You should also, and I don't have it on this slide, so I'm going to actually add it to the slide before I put this PowerPoint up for you. Your introduction should also introduce your sources. And by that, I mean, it should mention that you're talking about letters or that you're talking about images, a radio interview with a member of the American Indian movement. Doesn't have to be long, you don't have to describe them, but briefly say, these are the sources that we're going to explore. Because your reader should be ready in paragraph 1 to dig in. I know what we're going to talk about. I know what we're going to look at. I'm ready to read. So intro paragraph, required element. Body paragraphs. Another question I get a lot is how many? Well, it's up to you, but it's a really short essay. At least 2, no more than 4. Less than 2, more than 4, you're in a danger zone. Your paragraphs are doing something wild. Every paragraph has a purpose. It is doing work for you. You should know what it is. You should be able to condense it down to a topic sentence to make an outline. You should be able to. You don't have to have a topic sentence. If you want, you can, but you should be able to condense it down. What is this paragraph doing? How is it supporting my thesis? What primary sources is it using? Every body paragraph is analyzing primary sources. It is not talking about secondary sources. It is not giving more and more historical context. It may include some historical context in your analysis, but it's not getting bogged down with anything other than analyzing the primary sources. Not have room to do anything else in these paragraphs. And it's showing your reader how this specific primary source or primary sources in the body paragraph supports your argument. How you arrange your sources in the body paragraphs depends. There's not a specific way to do it. There's a variety of ways. It will be informed by your argument. So let's look at some of the ways you can organize your paragraphs. You can organize them by source. Each paragraph is a source. You could organize it by theme, that each paragraph talks about a different element or theme. You could organize it by perspective. ERA example, pro-ERA, anti-ERA as your 2 different perspectives. So it's really up to you how you want to organize. You could also, and this isn't on here, you could organize them chronologically. If you don't know where to start, organize them chronologically, see what happens over time. So some of the ways you could organize your paragraph: source 1, source 2, source 3. You could organize theme 1, all my sources, theme 2, all my sources, theme 3, all my sources, or theme 1, 1 or 2 sources, theme 2, 2 or 3, you know, source number 3 or 4, third paragraph, source number 5, all on the same theme. That's entirely up to you. You could go back and forth with perspectives. In this example, 1, 2, 1, imagine you're writing about the Equal Rights Amendment, pro-ERA, anti-ERA sources. You could talk about, this is the pro-ERA argument based on my sources. This is the anti-ERA argument based on my sources. Let me go back to the pro-ERA argument to wrap up my sources. Or argument theme 1, perspective 1, perspective 2, both perspectives together. This is totally up to you. What I want to stress is that there's multiple ways to organize, and I am not picky. What I want to see is that it makes sense. Oh, I see what you're doing here. This can be very simple, chronological, source, source, source. It can be much more complicated, but I want to see that you've thought about how the sources need to be organized to best support your argument. So again, your thesis is guiding your organization. Thesis is the most challenging part. Once you've got it, the rest is like falling off a log, but it's hard to find the thesis, which makes the whole thing difficult. Before we move on to conclusion, do you have questions about how you should be using your body paragraphs effectively? Nathan's question about the quoting is very important here because you need to be very selective so that you understand how that space that you're using for quotes, which you should be using, is driving the thesis, is guiding your reader. What I don't want to see, what I'll be most disappointed to see, because I want to see something, I'll be most disappointed to see a huge block quote, not much else on a source. Next paragraph, big block quote, not much else. I want to see more of your analysis, your description, if you're starting there, right? The rubric says you need to move beyond description to analysis, but description is a fine place to start. But I want to see you talking to your sources, sources talking to each other. You're like, what the hell does that mean? That you're in there, that you're not just accepting your sources. This is what the source says, so this is what the situation was. I want to see you in there talking about what's important about the source. What does it mean? What's significant? Where do I think it's a little too biased? Where do I see its perspective, right? So this is you, your sources, hanging out, talking to each other, talking to your reader. And then you get to your conclusion. Remember that this is where your thesis is going to end up. Even if you start with a strong thesis, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find an even better one that has wandered into your conclusion. You have written yourself into it. In the conclusion, I do want to see you restate your thesis in some way. So let's pull back and think about the organization of the essay. Introduction, here's my argument. Here's my thesis. Body paragraphs, supporting with sources, supporting with sources, supporting with sources. Conclusion, let me remind you how I just supported my thesis with those sources. So that's the sort of can seem a little bit dull, like I'm going to tell it to you again. Find a fresh way to say it. Point out the good work you just did in the paragraphs. See what I did? Is what you're saying to your reader. And then it's a free space. You can add present context, how this relates to today. You can relate it to other historical events or people or subjects. You can discuss alternate arguments. This is a good place to say, this is what I've argued, but you could also argue this based on the sources. You could discuss perspectives that were missing. For example, if you were doing the settlement house topic and you didn't find any sources on the immigrants that use settlement houses, you could say, what's missing here is immigrant voices. That's something we need to find to more fully understand the subject. So one of the things historians do with their conclusion, that's where they set little tasks for other historians. They say, I didn't talk about this. Other historians, why don't you go talk about that? So you can bring up here, here's some elements I didn't discuss. Here's perspectives I didn't locate. Here's what we need to know that my essay didn't cover. So beyond restating a thesis, it very much is your free space. You could also self-reflect. This is how the subject relates to me. This is why I chose it. This is why it's meaningful in my life. I want to be a social worker, so I'm looking at settlement houses, what they did well and what needs improvement. I'm writing about Stonewall because that's my community and I don't know much about it. I'm writing about the American Indian movement because I want to know more about my roots. Great place to put that. You could also put that a little bit, if that could be your hook too. You can put a little bit of that personal reflection in your intro as your hook if you want to draw readers in. All right. And you're going to find your thesis there. Your improved thesis is hanging out in your conclusion. So you want to look at, did a stronger thesis emerge? Can I rewrite my body paragraphs now that I've honed in on this stronger thesis? How can I better support it? So let's come back to what a strong thesis looks like. It is historical, specific, rooted in sources, arguable. In some disciplines or in some classes, you have practiced posing a question as the beginning of your paper. In history and in some other disciplines, the thesis is not a question, it's the answer. So you need to answer that question in your intro. Let's look at some theses that are not clear, specific, historical, or arguable. And I put up examples here about 1301, English and conflicts between English colonizers and Native American populations. Let's imagine that was your subject. Not clear. That is, you're going to ask a question but not answer it. How can our understanding of past conflicts inform the present? These are all real theses, by the way, that students have written, and with my permission, I've put in the PowerPoint. That's not a thesis. That's the question that the student needs to answer with the thesis. Let's look at something non-specific. Religion was important to people in the colonies. Which one? Which colonies? What religion? I want to know something about the Quakers and the Puritans. Religion was significant in the colonies, but was very regionally different. For instance, in Pennsylvania, the focus was on Quakerism. Massachusetts, the focus was on Puritanism, which led to different colonial societies. Now you're getting specific. You're talking about how Puritans and Quakers created different societies. All right. Non-historical or ahistorical. Since the dawn of time, people have had conflict. The English are just another example. That's not how we do history. History seeks to understand how and why in specific points of time this conflict emerged. So you can't just say, well, there's always been conflict. This is just more of the same. That's not historical. To use our ERA example, it would be women have always fought for equal rights. That's non-historical. You need to pull it into the 70s to the ERA to what women were actually doing in your subject. And then let's look at a thesis that is not arguable. There was conflict in the colonies between the English and indigenous people. You could not argue against that in good faith. It's not an argument because I can't argue against it using historical reality. So hopefully these aren't bad theses, these are working theses. Hopefully some of these have made it more clear what I mean by arguable, historical, specific. I'm going to run through my FAQ real quick. Then I'm going to show you a pretty good thesis. And then I'm going to have a question and answer. And if anyone feels brave and wants to put their thesis up for us to workshop, you can be ready to do that if you want to. But let's just run through the FAQ real fast. And if you've got questions, put them in chat. What citation style? Up to you. MLA, APA, Chicago style. What I do is in text citations. For MLA and APA, that's the little paragraph, parentheses rather. Chicago, it's a footnote. There are in-text citation guides in the resources in the module. I'll double check and make sure that you have access to them. If you want to go by the formatting of your discipline's style, so I'm going to do APA because that's what my discipline uses, and you're going through the formatting for the whole essay and you find things that like, well, my formatting says to put my name in it, but you say don't. I grade blind, so don't put your name anywhere on your paper. Everything else you can go by the formatting of your choice, APA, MLA, or Chicago, and that's fine by me. Remember that Canvas, if you use the text box, will mess up your formatting a little bit. I understand. I'm not worried about that. As long as I see a title, I didn't put that anywhere. I'm going to add that. A title and clear paragraphs with in-text citations, I'm happy because Canvas will mess with your formatting a little bit. But practice the formatting that you need to practice. Is it okay if I don't use all my sources or use different sources from the DPLA? Yes. If you end up swapping sources or you chose 5, you only use 4, no problem. As long as all of your primary sources originate with the Digital Public Library of America and the primary sources, you're fine. Can my paper be longer than 700 words? No. This is the one I get the most. The challenge is do it concisely. Trust me, just go through and start cutting stuff. You'll find when the pressure hits, you're going to figure out what you need to cut. What isn't serving you? What isn't pushing your thesis forward? What isn't offering support? Cut it out. If you can't embed your images, if you're struggling with that, please at the very least put the direct links to them. I need to be able to go and look at them quickly and I don't want to go hunting for them. So best case scenario, they're embedded right alongside your text, or maybe they're at the bottom of your essay. Worst case scenario, just give me a direct link so I can go look at them as I read. The rubric does not require a works cited page because we're all working from the DPLA and because I'm asking for in-text citation or footnotes if it's Chicago style, but you can certainly add one, especially if you want more practice. Big focus here is practicing the style that you need to practice. So if you want to practice that, absolutely, you can put one in, no problem at all. Okay, questions or does anyone want to workshop your thesis? Anyone feeling brave? That's all right. We can look at one together.
I have a question on the title.
Yes.
You want us to have the title right, or like?
I'm not grading on it because I keep forgetting to add it to the rubric. But yeah, I love a title. And here's why I like a title, Nathan. Your title should hint at your argument. So it's just another opportunity to guide your reader, to tell your reader what you're about to do. I'm a big fan of an alliterative title with an explanatory subtitle, but you can give me any type of title you want. I mean, it can be very basic because like I said, I keep forgetting to put it in the instructions. It's not in the rubric. You're not losing points. But yeah, if you can come up with a snappy little title that also hints at your argument, that's gold. That's solid gold right there. But I'm not grading on it because I keep forgetting to. Let's look at a thesis together.
Ma'am, can me ask it you?
Absolutely.
You are now say about one paragraph and support by 3 support detail. And then after that, conclusion. That's all in essay. We don't need second paragraph.
No, you do. Yeah, so it should be, now the number of body paragraphs is up to you, but no less than 2, kind of up to you.
2 paragraph or 1 paragraph and then support by one first support detail, second support detail, third support detail, and then conclusion. Just 1 paragraph, one body paragraph, or you need 1 paragraph with support detail, second paragraph with support detail, third paragraph with support detail.
You got it. That's the one, exactly.
And then after that, conclusion.
Conclusion, exactly. So
And then you need conclusion, thesis, rewrite thesis, but not write thesis like in introduction. No, opposite.
you could write, so opposite is an interesting way to put it. You could restate it, but you could also say, this is my argument, but you could also argue this other thing if you want to mix it up a little bit. But you have it.
You need my opinion, or you need the rewriting thesis by other way.
I think I'd like to see, I want to see the rewriting of the thesis, but then there is room for your personal reflection, personal opinion. I statements are fine in a conclusion. If you want to write, I think this, or I found that, this interested me because, that's all perfectly fine.
I got it. But when you finish, I need a complete discussion with you. When you finish from the workshop, I need some minutes. Okay. Sure. Thank you.
So what you've described is the 5-paragraph essay. Intro, support, 3 paragraphs, conclusion. 5-paragraph essay is fine. I know some people don't like it. It's boring. It's just a vehicle. It's just a structure you're not boring ideas into, right? The structure isn't what makes something interesting. It's your analysis. So yeah, the 5-paragraph essay, perfectly fine way to approach that.
But you need one support detail, but every paragraph.
Yeah, I want to see sources in every paragraph. I want to see a different element of that support in every paragraph. Absolutely.
And then in the support detail, you need, for example, or no?
Say it again.
When I'm writing the first paragraph, and then I'm putting support details, and then in support details, you need, for example, or no? Sorry?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding what you're asking.
Okay, now I'm writing the first paragraph, body paragraph, have support details, and then in support details, you need, for example, and then I'm writing about, for example, from the source, take it some quotation, and then put it, and then writing about the, for example, or no? Just you need support detail.
If you're asking, do I want to see like quotations? Yes.
What about, for example, inside paragraph writing? You need, for example, and then I'm writing about, for example, or just you need quotation and support details. Sorry.
Can you put your question in chat? I'm not understanding it.
Okay, now
put your question in chat so I can take a look at it. In the meantime, let's look at this example. This is a 1301 example. And
I can't I can't go into my laptop.
Okay, well, sit tight then. We can talk at the end. Sit tight.
Okay.
So let's look at this thesis together. And this thesis isn't perfect. There's still room for improvement, but let me show you what I like about this thesis. And let's kind of highlight it. Oh, that's all right. Cancel that. Just home. No, go back. Sorry. Okay. Let's look at this thesis here. It's the last sentence, and I'll show you the part that I really like. Features Willard's, Seward's, and Warren's writings, we can rewrite that a little bit, illustrate how education was the key to achieving women's ideals on motherhood and workforce. This needs some rewriting, but let me show you what I like about it. It mentions the sources. Now you could make this much simpler. The writings of women reformers illustrate that education was the key for them in achieving their goals. I like that it mentions the sources and gets much more specific. Says the key to the women's reform movement, according to reformers at the time, was education. And then it jumps into them. Jumps into how education is seen in their writings. So it pulls out the elements of their writings that support that argument for education. like I said, this thesis isn't perfect. You rarely find an absolutely perfect thesis, but it's using the sources, making a more specific arguments about them. And it's talking about how the sources work together. Taken together, these sources show that education is the key across sources. So you can see that what this student has done is look similar element of all their sources. They could have also pulled out differences. They could have said Beecher and Willard disagree on women's public role in life. Totally different thesis, totally different argument based on the same sources. So your sources offer a variety of arguments. It's up to you to decide which element you're going to pull out, which element you're going to home in on and really support through your essay. At the most basic element, I want to see you engage with the sources. If you feel like I haven't met these thresholds, my thesis isn't perfect, my analysis isn't perfect, that's fine. This is practice, right? You're just going to keep getting better and better in your writing. So at the very basic level, I want to see sincere analysis, sincere engagement, sincere attempts to understand primary sources, and a sincere attempt to try and make an argument. It will not be perfect, and that's fine. It just has to exist. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you're panicking at the very end, hand in what you've got. If it's a rough draft, say, this is a really rough draft, I'm sorry. If it's your annotations, I don't know, here's what I think about the sources, and here's what I think my argument, hand something in. The only thing that I don't want to see for sure is nothing. Or someone else's ideas. Those are the two things I don't want to see. I don't see nothing, and I don't want to see someone else's ideas. Okay. How do you do an in-text citation for an image? Just like you would anything else, the first time you reference it or analyze it, you put a little parentheses. The image might have a photographer, or if it's a piece of art, it might have an artist. Otherwise, a description of the image. Puerto Rican girls outside of New York schools, date, right? Depending on your style. So you in-text citation for an image, just like you would for a piece of work.
Okay, Mom. With
Yeah.
me?
Anyone else have any questions? But yes, we can stick around, Sahab.
Okay.
The owner, no, you don't have to include in the in-text citation. It's very short. For MLA and APA, it's author, creator, and either page number or date, depending on which style you're using. If there's no author or no creator that you can identify, you put a description of what it is. And let's look at an image here. Here's a portrait of Dorothea Dix. And you'll see here in the DPLA, it tells you how to cite the item. So this one doesn't have, we don't know the photographer. So you would put it as Dorothea L. Dix. That's the title that the DPLA gave it, and that's fine for you to use. So some of them will have a very clear author. This author is Tiffany Francis. If it didn't have an author, you would use the title, Life of Dorothea Dix. If it doesn't have a title or an author, that's when you use the description that the DPLA gave it, which is going to be right here. For your in-text citation, author, last name, date or page number, depending on your style, or name of the artifact or text, or description of the artifact or text. So I'm going to put up let me double check. I'm pretty sure there are already in-text citation guides. Let me pull them up for you.
Question about one of mine.
And these are the in-text citation guides that are in the DPLA additional writing sources. Other questions?
On mine, or one of my citations, it's like a petition and it's like a old piece of paper. And when I'm doing MLA, but so when I did it, I put the person who wrote it, I put their last name and the year. Is that correct? Or like, because I was gonna say like the exact line, or like, you know what I mean? Because it's only like a petition,
Oh,
like
okay, right. So if your citation style requires you to put the page number, but it's a one-page flyer, no page, you don't need any page number at all.
okay, yeah, because most of mine are like just the last name and then the year.
You run
That's
into that a lot with these DPLA sources because they're intentionally, they choose short ones, or some of them are a poster, a flyer. Yeah, it's just, especially because we're all looking at the DPLA, it's going to be easy for me to find if I wanted to go and double check. So yeah, if it's a single flyer, if it's the do it now flyer, it doesn't have an author, it doesn't have a creator, it doesn't have page numbers, your in-text citation is going to look like do it now flyer, because that's all the information that you need for the in-text citation. If you want to practice your works cited, that's where you could put full information, where it is, who owns it, where you found it, et cetera, et cetera.
I do have a question about the thesis. So
Yeah.
if our event surrounds historical events that occurred, could our argument or thesis be basically how our actions and reactions to that event caused like present day conflicts?
This is a wonderful question. So Irene's asking, can the argument be this has affected later dates, or how it's affected how we've seen this now? That can only be your thesis if you have primary sources specifically to support that. So what you would need for that to be your thesis is a primary source from a later time or from today. If you have it, for instance, the Voting Rights Act is overturned in 2014, you have a source on that. So you could make that argument there. But if you don't have that source to make that argument, or to have that be your thesis, that secondary argument that you're making, this affects how we view this conflict now, that belongs in your conclusion. Because you probably can't support, you might be able to, it depends on what sources you have, but you have to be able to support that argument with your sources. So what you might say is that, here's what your sources that you do have say about the conflict. In your conclusion, here's how this has informed us today. Does that make sense?
Yes. So that's the one difficulty I'm having is doing a good argumentative thesis only because of the events that occurred. So like how exactly would I be able to make an argument based off of the events? Because they're actual catastrophe events that occurred to the US. So it's like, there's no real argument except if I state my opinion on whether what happened.
Are you doing 9/11 in Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
You have a weird prompt because it doesn't work. Here's what you can make. So you can't make the argument that you want to make because you don't have sources for it. So you have to look at what are your sources showing you. And I would suggest, Irene, that one of the things that set is really good at is showing how the government responded. Are there similarities or differences from in Pearl Harbor and 9/11 about government response? That's an argument that you can make. In your conclusion, you can connect it, right? If you want to talk about the war on terror and the ongoing war on terror, that goes in your conclusion because that's not quite what your sources are about, but you can say, this is how the government responded to these two attacks. This is the messaging about these attacks. And then in your conclusion, you can make an argument. That messaging still affects us because that messaging still informs our argument because. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically in the conclusion is where I could state my opinion on the two events and how we reacted.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you want to get away from is I have to prove cause and effect with these sources. Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be what this caused, what this affected, what this caused. It can be, how do I want to say it? I'm just going to go back to what I already said. Sorry. You can just get a little bit more specific. Well, I'm just looking at government responses. So let me make an argument about that. Later, I can talk about this much more broad, long, historical effects of these attacks, right? But your sources probably aren't going to let you do that. Your sources want you to make a smaller, more specific argument about them.
Okay, thank you.
Really good questions, Irene. All right. Any other questions?
What time is
Yes.
our, sorry, this is, I don't know why I didn't know this, but when is our exam?
Oh, that's like a final exam that you come to class for or whatever?
Yeah.
Doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. That's not real. This, I want you to focus on your DPLA essay. I have office hours by appointment, extended office hours by appointment Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. If you want to look at a draft together, if you want to look at a thesis together, if you have specific questions, make an appointment. You can do that in the calendar. Go into your calendar, search for appointment. It'll search. You can search by class, and they'll come up the times that are available. If you need to, if you want to go over a draft with me, but those times aren't, you're not available at those times, send me a message. Tell me when you are available. We'll see what we can do. But that's the only way that I can look at a draft. So you can't send me a draft in email. You can't submit a draft, but you can come and sit in Zoom and look at a draft with me. But you got to make an appointment. But I'd be happy to do that if you want to do that, make an appointment. All right. Any other questions?
Can we chat with you now?
Absolutely. So I'm going to stick around. If no one else has any questions, I'll stick around so we can talk some more.
Okay.
Sahab, and the rest of you, thank you for making an awesome, thank you for your awesome semester. Keep my email for when you need letters of recommendation. Make an appointment if you want some extra help next week. Otherwise, have a wonderful summer. Get some free summer classes.
Mom, I send you this final essay. You are in email. I choose from this issues. Checking, please.
Okay. So what I'm seeing in chat is that you copied some information from the final primary source analysis. And then listed 3 topics. The topic that you originally submitted that you said you were going to write about was women in World War II. Is that not what you're going to write about?
This?
Yes.
This? I'm writing before this, and then I'm sending essay for this last time. Can me write again by this, or I rewriting my essay again and then send you?
Yes. I want you to rewrite your essay on women in the home front, the World War II one, and I want you to rewrite it very carefully using specific primary sources from that DPLA set.
Let me one question or some question, and then you are need picture inside my essay or no?
Yes, if you can.
Okay, and then you need the references in my essay, put it inside.
Yes.
Okay, and then you are need site with references. For example, I'm taking some references from book, and then I'm taking some references from internet.
From the textbook?
Yeah. For example, I tell you, but as you are explaining for me which references you need.
So you should only use the textbook is your secondary source. It's your background information. You read it for your own understanding so that you understand the historical context of women in World War II on the home front. You should not be quoting it or referencing it extensively, but if you are taking some ideas directly from the textbook, I do want you to reference that. But I'm more interested in you incorporating that into your own understanding for the historical context. But if you are using ideas from your textbook, please do tell me so that I know this is an idea from the textbook before you tell me your own idea. So yeah, it's better to oversight. If you're not sure, should I be citing this? Better safe than sorry.
When can we send the title and then topic for you? When? Today, tomorrow? When?
Send what?
The title for the essay, and then you are now yeah, the title for the essay.
So I don't want you sending me any element of your essay.
Okay.
If you want to look over anything though, make an appointment for Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and we can look at it together. But I don't want anyone sending me any part of their essay.
Okay. Appointment with you by chat like this, by Zoom? All right. Okay, ma'am. Okay. Let me to show you the references. 1 minute, just 1 minute, and then I tell you about my essay, and then tell me about that. Me is good or no? Just 1 minute.